All right. Well, we're glad you're safe, and we're obviously hoping for the best. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Joining me now is Josh Campbell. He's a former FBI supervisory special agent. Josh, in a situation like this, what are police doing in this immediate stage?
Well, we're hearing from law enforcement officials there in the area that talked about this response. So you had San Bruno Police, you had the California Highway Patrol, and once that word goes out, you'll have that fusing of resources that will descend on that campus and start working through methodically to determine, is there a threat and where is it? In these campuses, for anyone who's been there, they know these are large, sprawling compounds, so it takes a while, and it's going to be a while until we finally get the all clear for police. For them to send out word that there is no longer a threat, that is a type of call that is serious. It's something that they're going to ensure that they have right before it happens. And so as you see, these pictures here, the helicopter footage, they have a lot of ground to cover, and they're going to be going through step by step. One thing that is good with these facilities is that they do practice a lot with law enforcement. So if you think of the fire department having the layout of buildings and knowing, where the standpipes are, where the sprinklers are, same with the police. I mean, they're going to know exactly how to navigate this building and work through it. A lot of former law enforcement officers actually go to work in security for these types of facilities. So they do have that relationship. One thing I'll say too is that we saw some of the numbers of 911 calls. I wouldn't read too much into that at this point. In an incident like this, where you have so many people concentrated, and if anyone hears shots, they're going to start calling. So I don't think that we can say at this point the extent or the gravity of the situation until we get more details. But obviously, we'll stay tuned and we'll stay plugged in with our law enforcement contacts.
If you're just joining us, shortly after the top of the hour, at about 1:01 Pacific time, San Bruno police notified the public through Twitter and other means. Police activity at 901 Cherry Street. Please stay out of the area. That is a building owned by YouTube. And then shortly after that, they reported on Twitter, the San Bruno police, we are responding to an active shooter. Please stay away from Cherry Avenue and Bay Hill Drive. That's in San Bruno, California, just south of San Francisco. The challenge, Josh Campbell, for police in a situation like this, where there is an active shooter at YouTube headquarters in one of the buildings at YouTube, is they don't know how many there are. They don't know where the person is, and they don't know if the shooter is trying to blend in with everyone else who is evacuating the building, and that's why we see San Bruno police frisking individuals who have lined up to exit and get out of the area.
No, you're right. And lots of challenges with a facility of this size, particularly communication. I mean, if you think about it, as we've heard, unfortunately, far too often in recent days about the training that law enforcement goes through and their response and actually surging to the location of the sound of shots and the threats, they don't have the luxury of arriving on the scene and then gathering together and figuring out how they're going to go in. Regardless of what their entry point is, and as they arrive at this facility, they're going to go. And so that communication is going to be important. Unfortunately, it's something that they train for. As you mentioned, they have to treat everyone as though they're a threat until they're convinced they're not a threat. So as you see these images here of them going through, you see people, earlier coming out with their hands up and being frisked. They want to make sure that none of these people are actually, threats themselves. If you remember back to Parkland, there was some of the reporting about the shooter actually, exiting and blending in and then getting out. So that's obviously at the forefront of the minds of officers as they're dealing with these people, obviously treating them professionally, but also treating them seriously enough where, again, unless they're convinced they're not a threat, they're going to treat them otherwise. But again, employees, unfortunately, it's part of these active shooter drills as well, is they have gone through a lot of this training, especially with these massive facilities, these large companies, and unfortunately kind of know the drill. And what we're seeing play out on our screen right now is that response.
Google, which owns YouTube, Google Communications has just tweeted regarding the YouTube situation. We are coordinating with authorities and will provide official information here from Google and YouTube as it becomes available. I want to bring in James Gagliano. He's a retired FBI supervisory special agent. James, thanks for joining us. How will law enforcement begin to investigate this?
Well, Jake, a far too familiar scene as we see the aerial photos or the aerial video of the complex there. And as a former SWAT team leader, I can tell you that the problems inherent in a site that's this large with that many employees. And to your point earlier, you're trying to assess in real time, who the good guys are and who the civilians we need to extricate from the place, and then who the shooter is or what the motivation for the shooter is. And for law enforcement, the calculus, you've got to do this in real time. The calculus, is it somebody who's mentally disturbed? Is it somebody who's a disgruntled employee who's coming back to exact some type of revenge? Is it a domestic dispute? Is it two employees that just have a beef with each other? Is it a mass shooter? Is it somebody looking to drive up a casualty count as quickly as they can? So all those things have to be, in real time, have to be figured out. And the two different procedures that law enforcement would be using right now in the tactical resolution phase of this is this a contain and negotiate, meaning set up a perimeter, try to get all the civilians out of there as you possibly can, set up a perimeter, and then look to set up negotiations? Or is this a mass casualty shooting where we need to go in, interdict immediately, move to the sound of the guns?
All right, James, stand by. I want to bring in CNN's Brian Stelter now. Brian, you know somebody in the building. Have you been able to make contact with that person? What are you hearing?
Yeah, talking to a couple staffers who are at YouTube headquarters. One of them is still waiting to be evacuated from the building right now. The other person has been brought outside, was able to get to a vehicle and be able to head home. Some of these staffers, once they've been searched, once they've been allowed to leave, they're trying to get away from the scene so as not to be part of the problem, as we see a lot of activity around the YouTube campus. YouTube's been based here, Jake, for about 8 years. This is a campus situation. These buildings do have security. When you're visiting or when you're a staffer, you have to check in, you have to have your badge. But there are, as Miguel Marquez said, thousands of people working at a campus this size. And in San Bruno, there just south of San Francisco, you have a lot of staffers at this time of day coming and going because it's a lunch hour there at YouTube. So far, all we've heard from the company is what you mentioned, that the company is coordinating with authorities and doesn't have anything else to say yet.
Did either of the individuals, the YouTube employees with whom you spoke, did either of them hear shots, hear screaming? What do they know about the actual incident?
Yes, one of these two employees did describe hearing shots from within the building that he was in. That person has been able to now leave the campus safely. I think it is hopefully a positive sign that we're not seeing chatter on social media about gunfire still happening. No indication that right now people are having to take cover at this moment. That may be a positive sign, but we only know what we're seeing or not seeing online and what we're seeing from these aerial pictures.
Thanks, Brian Stelter. Let me bring Josh Campbell back, the former FBI supervisory special agent. And Josh, right now we're looking at images of YouTube employees, presumably, who are lining up to be frisked by local police to make sure that none of them is the shooter. And that's obviously one of the complications when you have an active shooter situation.
No, it is. And, you know, as I mentioned before, this is going to take some time. There are a lot of people that work in a facility of this size. So, again, you know, similar to a fire drill, if you think of at your place of employment, we now are in the era of active shooter drills. And so employees go through that. They know where to go, where to unite once they're outside the building. And we're seeing that now, employees that are gathering together. And, again, law enforcement responding is going to go through each person to make sure that there's not a threat. And a lot of this is going to depend also on what witnesses are saying. So as they're going through and not only determining if someone among them may be involved, but they also want to know what they saw. They want to know what they heard so that they can determine what it is that they're dealing with. Is this one person, you know, that showed up and maybe that someone knew, or was it a stranger? Maybe someone didn't know. That's all going to be good intelligence that they're going to need in order to figure out what they're dealing with.
So, Josh, when Google, which owns YouTube, tweets out that they are working with authorities, and presumably they're speaking for YouTube as well. What does that mean? How can the executives of YouTube be helping authorities right now?
Well, companies of this size work with law enforcement on a daily basis. And I know even from my time in the FBI here in Los Angeles that a lot of these major companies will have, you know, these relationships that are built, whether it's, you know, just general security of a facility, maybe it's there's some type of cyber issue, or, you know, there are lots of different threats that these types of facilities face. And so they have those inroads into law enforcement. When we flip the switch from an investigation into a serious issue like we're seeing play out in front of us, it's those types of relationships that are going to be tapped into on both sides. So you're going to have law enforcement reaching out to the company to try to determine what's going on. And if the company has information, they're going to be doing the same thing. Remember, at the end of the day, both sides, whether you're on law enforcement, whether you're one of these companies, your goal is the protection of life and your employees. And so they're going to be working together, really tapping into those relationships. And as I mentioned before, a lot of these corporate security folks that we see in companies are former law enforcement. And so, to be able to pick up the phone and call and share critical information that may help, identify a threat and find out what they're dealing with, that's going to be key. And we'll see that play out. But I think, bottom line, let's just, as we see these images unfold, it's going to take some time. Again, they're going to be going through that facility. We may not have a resolution on this for some time now, but obviously it's something we'll continue to watch. I've been talking with some of our law enforcement sources that we know. They're trying to gather some additional information here as we move along, and we'll provide those details as they continue to come about.
Thank you, Josh. Let me go back now to James Gagliano, and he's a retired FBI supervisory special agent. And James, we are obviously just watching this breaking news situation unfold. The San Bruno police first alerted individuals about this within the hour, just 47 minutes ago on Twitter. What are you hearing from your sources?
Well, first and foremost, looking at the video feed that's coming in right now, Jake, and seeing the firefighters on scene, that's part of consequence management, and that usually happens after the tactical resolution takes place. I also saw some folks that were in shirt sleeves that had bulletproof vests on that were moving into the area, and they appeared to be coming back outside. I don't know if there's a stand down yet, but I'm also surprised at how close they're keeping some of the civilians. What we teach civilians to do in these situations, as these type of events have proliferated of recent, we teach them these four things. The first thing to do in a situation like this with an active shooter is to run and get out of there. Do what you can to put as much distance between you and the gunfire as possible. If you can't do that, to hide. Try to find some place to provide you two things: cover and concealment. Third, if you have nothing else that you can do in the event that you have to face an adversary, is then to fight. And then fourth, and this is supremely important, is to tell. So I'm certain right now that the folks that are on the scene are trying to gather, from the law enforcement perspective, as much intelligence, actionable intelligence they can about how many shooters, where they located, where were they moving to, what seemed to be their motivation, were they looking for somebody, were they just wantonly shooting. Those are all critical pieces that will go together to kind of paint a profile for who law enforcement is going to be confronting in this.
And right now, we're just looking at trying to get as much information as we can about YouTube. We're told that there are more than 1,100 staffers on this campus. That makes this quite a challenge. The ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, just tweeted that the ATF San Francisco Field Division is responding to a reported shooting at YouTube headquarters in San Bruno, California. What kind of role, James, might the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives play in a situation like this?
Wow. Obviously an incendiary device or an improvised explosive device, the casualties that can be caused by even a rudimentary one. We saw this in Austin, and the fear and the terror that can create. For the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to be involved in this, that says that there might be some indication that there might have been a device found, possibly. That's something they could be pulled in on. A case like this on such a grand scale, so many different buildings here, for police to put together a perimeter to make sure that they don't let anybody that was involved in this squirt out, get outside of the perimeter, and B, then to move to and find wherever the shooter is, because this place is so cavernous. That's where the intelligence is going to come in and play and be so important. And Jake, you know the old saying about combat or law enforcement: initial reports are always inaccurate. So law enforcement has to kind of sift through this, understanding that the reports they're hearing through social media, the reports they're hearing from two people that might have seen the exact same thing but seen it from a different perspective, they've got to sort through that and try to get it right in real time.
Let me bring Josh Campbell back. And Josh, your response to the fact that ATF San Francisco is coming to the YouTube headquarters to assist with this operation.
Yeah, these types of incidents, it's going to be all hands on deck, and you're going to have federal, state, local law enforcement responding, providing those resources. And once they arrive, we're going to see that unified command. They'll be working together. Again, we were hearing earlier as far as San Bruno and the California Highway Patrol on scene. Now we're seeing those federal resources that are also flooding in, and they'll be working together. Again, with the size of this complex, they're going to be tapping into all the resources that they can get in order to go methodically and try to determine what it is that they're dealing with. They're also going to have a lot of witnesses to interview. You mentioned the number 1,100 employees. That's a lot for law enforcement officers to fan out and again try to talk to each person to figure out what did you see. A lot of times witnesses may not even know that what they saw is important, so they're going to be trying to gather that information to bring that out of them, and that's going to require a lot of law enforcement officers. Also, in the era that we're in with the digital age, everyone has a camera, everyone has a phone. So was there some type of evidence that they have from inside these 1,100 potential witnesses here? Again, it's a tech company. They're used to this, this field and this type of medium. So is that something that can help law enforcement? These are all questions that they're going to be asking as they go through. I think one thing interesting to note as we sit here and watch the footage is it appears from the helicopter footage that we're no longer seeing that quick arrival of resources that we saw earlier, where you had law enforcement officers that were really surging. Again, it's too soon to read into what exactly that means. Perhaps they're at capacity and they're able to go through methodically, go through the facility. At some point, there's the law of diminishing returns, where you don't want to have so many resources that they can't communicate with each other. But at least it tells me, in looking at how things have appeared to calm a little bit, that you're not seeing those additional emergency vehicles show up. You're not seeing people taken out. That tells me that it may be a smaller issue than obviously what everyone fears, but we'll continue to watch the footage.
Yeah, and that's the point that James was making earlier. And James, it does seem when you see police walking, I don't want to say casually, but they're not running into the building. There is not, often in these active shooter situations, they set up a perimeter and then they keep pushing the perimeter farther and farther out to keep innocent civilians as far away as possible from the potential danger. That I don't see that urgency in the images we're seeing. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it does look like what you were suggesting, that possibly there has been something of a stand down.
Certainly, and Jake, we're trying to read the tea leaves here and see this from the images that are coming in and what we're seeing in open source reporting right now. But I think it's also important to make sure the viewers understand, when law enforcement sets up perimeters, there's never one perimeter. There's an outer perimeter, and then there's an inner perimeter. Now, the inner perimeter is where the frenetic activity is going to take place. That's where the tactical resolution goes down. That could be a particular building or a particular parking lot or a particular set of buildings. Then you would expand that out into a larger outer perimeter, and that may be what we're looking at right now. We don't know where the actual, and we refer to this as a crisis site. We don't know which building, which car, which parking lot is the actual crisis site. But understand these things happen in three kind of chronological lineups. The first thing is the crisis resolution. Stop the bad guy. If it's somebody with a gun, if it's somebody that happened to have a pipe bomb or something like that, we've got to get to them and interdict them right away and stop any harm and damage of property. The next thing is the consequence management, and that's why you see the firefighters out there. They're the ones who are going to come through after the place has been cleared. If there's any booby traps or tripwires or other things that could have been left behind by the bad guys, the firefighters will take care of any mitigation of noxious fumes or chemicals or fires or anything like that. Last thing, now it's important, but obviously the first two are much more important, is preservation of the crime scene, because we want to find out who did this, who was involved with them. Is it a single person? Is it a lone wolf? Or is it a number of bad actors that were working together as part of a conspiracy? And we need to be able to collect and harvest as much of the evidence, and that's where the crime scene folks, the FBI uses the evidence response team to come in and make sure that they put together a rock-solid case that can then be taken to trial to prosecute somebody that might have been behind this.
And we are seeing reports from journalists on Twitter about patients being admitted in local hospitals. These have not been independently confirmed by CNN, so I'm not going to give you the direct information, but there does seem to be some reporting out there from individual hospitals at Stanford and San Francisco of people being brought from YouTube to the hospitals. No word on condition, Josh, but as we know, sometimes from incidents like this, there are injuries that are not necessarily directly related to a shooting.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's all going to be information that we'll get more clarity on as it unfolds. If you think back to San Bernardino and obviously the deadly, horrific attack that happened there, also here in California, I talked to one of the medics who was there, who was actually a tactical medic, and that's something that law enforcement has really been focused on as of late, is having these resources on staff that can surge not only to an emergency room when need be, but to the scene of where an incident is taking place. And as we learned from San Bernardino and the after action there, even hospitals are now, they always were involved as far as getting word when these types of incidents happen, but they have these processes that they'll go through where they respond, they'll send out the code where everyone in the hospital and emergency room at these locations, within the vicinity of an incident will be on standby, understanding that at any time, under the worst of scenarios, they could start getting victims. Again, you always learn lessons from previous attacks. That's one of the things that they learned in San Bernardino, was to have that heads up, to have that notification, to have that training, and that's something that security professionals and hospitals and law enforcement are working together, throughout the country. We'll continue to gather that information. Obviously, if we start seeing the exit of emergency vehicles, that will be telling to us as far as are there patients that are actually being brought out. In some of these instances, they'll try to treat and triage on scene before they actually transport, and so that may just be something that we're not able to see. Obviously, we hope that that's not the case, that there aren't any injuries, that it is very, very much contained. But that's something that obviously we'll pay attention to.
And we're looking at live pictures right now of the YouTube campus in San Bruno, California. If you're just joining us, there are reports earlier today of an active shooter there within the hour. We have not heard from San Bruno police as to what the status of that is. We keep seeing individuals leaving the campus being frisked by San Bruno police. San Francisco General Hospital is now reporting that they are receiving patients, they are receiving victims from this incident at YouTube. That's according to our CNN affiliate KPIX. There are also 4 to 5 victims en route to Stanford Health Center. We don't know yet the conditions of those victims. If you're just joining us, within the hour, San Bruno police reported that there is an active shooter situation in the YouTube headquarters in San Bruno, California, which is just south of San Francisco. And James, the FBI has been covering and studying shooting situations, mass shooter situations and others since Columbine, and have concluded that most of these incidents take place fairly quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jake, I would tell you it probably goes back as far as August 1st of 1966, when the Texas clock tower shooter, Charles Whitman, climbed up a tower at the University of Texas in Austin and shot a number of students during summer classes. And that really is when the study of these type of events began to gather steam. Right. I guess the big thing here post-Columbine, and when you think about this, Jake, this month, it's 19 years to the month of Columbine. The lesson learned from that is we cannot wait for organic, homogenous teams to show up and to go in. We have to put together whatever law enforcement folks from whatever heterogeneous units or organizations show up. You've got to go to the sound of the guns. That's what we have to do. Law enforcement accepts a higher level of acceptable risk. That's what we take on when we take that badge or that shield and strap on that sidearm and swear that oath to protect and serve. And I'm confident that's probably what happened in this instance. I'm looking on the scene right now, and it looks like we're moving into a different phase right now. So hopefully we'll get some more here pretty soon.
James, stick around. Josh, too. I know Wolf Blitzer will probably want to talk to you both in the Situation Room. Stick around. Keep watching CNN for more on this breaking news. Thanks for watching.